Hi there, welcome to this demonstration tutorial how to use the Land Heightmaps Volume 1. But we're going to start by creating a landscape that's using these height maps, and I'll show you how to actually use the Unreal Engine system with these textures. So what I've already loaded up here is a Engine 423 project with all the height maps already loaded. I've created a 2 kilometer blank map for us to create some sort of a scene with some mountains and lakes and things like that. So let's start by having a look over on the left hand side at the Landscape tools. And on this side we've got the Sculpt tools. So here we have if we change this to the Alpha brush, then we have a texture slot on the left hand side. And what we can do is go down to the height maps folder, and inside of here we'll see all of the folders that are included in this pack. And the idea, really, from my experience with creating landscapes, is that it's much better to create something with the gradients textures first, because when the land is flat, it's hard to actually create undulations in the landscape. So if you start adding mountains and hills and things like that without first raising up the landscape, then because the landscape is already flat, then it's not as though you can add height to those mountains later on. So it's much better to actually create large details first and then add finer details later on. So if we start by dragging one of these gradient textures to the texture slot, then each texture of the gradient textures anyway has different height maps inside of each channel. So by default, the first channel, the red channel, it has the nice smooth gradient. If you change it to green, then we get something with a little bit more detail. Blue will have even more detail, and then alpha is an inverted version of the blue channel. So it's to create variations when you're trying to raise up that height map. So let's start with the green channel, something that's got a little bit of difference. And also we need to create a big brush size to cover a lot of landscape. Let's make that 30,000. Tool strength. Try something like 1 to begin with. So what we're looking to do is have a general idea of what kind of landscape we're looking for, and then to actually raise up. In fact, I think I'll make a little bit bigger. Yeah, to then raise up the landscape where you would have your hills and your mountains, and then leave the height map fairly low where your valleys and lakes are going to be. So let's create something. First thing you want to do is make sure that it's not raising up too much. So with a tool strength of 1, then we just need to have a look to see how much it's raised it up, which looks okay. If it is too aggressive, then you can just bring it down to half that. And also make sure that auto rotate is turned on, because what we're looking for is variation here. So we just let the nature of the brush just create hills or raise the landscape up where just randomly, really. So if we create something that's larger on the left hand side, where we'll put some hills and mountains and things like that, and then create some kind of flow to a valley. We'll raise that up a little bit more. And then once we're happy with the general flow of the landscape, then we can switch to one of the other channels if we want some more details. We're not looking to create the final level here. We're just looking for the broad general shape of it. And this is all based on your own artistic style as to what your level is going to be. If you do find that you do have these peaks that go too high, there's various ways in which you can knock these down. You could always change back to a smoother version of it, of the brush, decrease the size down, and then while hovering over this mound you could press the shift key and then click, and this will bring the mound down. If another way is to actually go to circular brush, again with a low amount, directly over it to bring it down with the shift key. And then another way is to use the flatten brush with the circular brush. That tends to be quite aggressive when it does it. But if we bring down the strength, like I say, as it can be quite aggressive on the sides. And the other way to smooth it out, of course, is to use the smooth brush. Which we're going to be using the smooth brush anyway. Because after you've done all of this, you generally want to smooth it out so it creates a much more even landscape to begin creating hills and mountains, things like that. If you do get these lines that appear, then these are an Unreal restriction on the they use a 8-bit depth for the images, for the textures, so for now that's a limitation of the Unreal Engine. So what we're going to do is go to the smooth brush, create a big size, and go around the landscape, smoothing it out. We can be more aggressive on the smoothing. So here we are, now smoothed out the landscape. So now we need to switch to some of the other brushes. Again, with the general idea of what we're trying to create here. That changes which brushes we need to use. So let's start with something. Well, we could start with a lake. Again, with the general idea of how we're going to create flow in this landscape. So in the bottom of the valley here, in this area. We could create some sort of water flow with a lake. So let's switch to the Sculpt Brush. Tool strength fairly low. Switch to the Alpha Brush. So what we'll do is we'll drag in one of the lakes. Set the brush size to be big. Turn off auto rotate. The auto rotate tool can be quite annoying sometimes because it's constantly rotating based on the movement of your mouse. So what you can do is you can position your cursor in the window, and as long as you drag off to the side you can still see that texture. Then you can actually rotate the texture with this tool, and once you've got the flow going in the right direction, then we can stamp that down. Now with these brushes we need to, I'll just make that bigger. With these lake brushes what we need to do is hold down the shift key so that we actually invert them to push the landscape down. So if we stamp one down here, we can get to see the topology that it creates. Now the lake brushes are good for lakes, but they're also good for creating valley slopes as well that have erosion on them. So let's rotate this round again. Press the shift key and then click. And what we're looking to do is not push it down too much to begin with. We can push it down a little bit more than that though. And we can also make it a little bit bigger as well. Generally, when you actually increase the brush size, you want to increase the tool strength as well. Just make sure that when you actually add these to the landscape that you're not being too aggressive with the amount you're pushing down in one click. In other words, the tool strength is too high, because what you get is these 8-bit lines that show up with the textures, and they then require extra smoothing, things like that. Much better to actually apply this brush with a much lower tool strength and then just apply it multiple times or with multiple different textures. So at the moment let's just try and create some flow, and then we can start understanding the general direction of things. Let's use another lake. Again, stamp it down. Try and understand the direction of the texture. Rotate it around. Press the shift key and stamp down again. See what that actually creates. Could use multiple ones. I'm just looking for a general idea of the kind of landscape that we're aiming for. once we move on to things like the hills and mountains, we can come down to the hills folder, drag in one of the hills. Probably use a big brush size for this. Again, number 2 for the tool strength. Really, it's a case of just stamp it down, see whether it looks correct, and then tweak the values, and then press undo and try again. Like I say, we're not looking to make radical changes all in one click. It's more an accumulation of changes that are going to make a landscape that looks beautiful. And of course, once you've got this landscape all sculpted, then you can move on to painting and adding foliage and things like that. And as well as that, you want to use variation as well. So it's a case of using lots of different height maps, like I say, that are accumulated together to create variations. You don't want to use all the same height map in all the locations, otherwise you start to see the repetitive nature of the landscape, of the texture. And another idea as well is that when you're actually creating a landscape for your game, then you've also got to think of the scale, because these grids that are on this checkerboard material, this default checkerboard material, each square is 1 meter by 1 meter. So, if you imagine your player being in this location, then rotate the view around so that you can actually see what the player is actually going to see when they're playing the game. And as well as that, when it comes to the high spots on the landscape, then what is beyond the hill as well, because you want to obscure the end of the landscape. So if you were positioned over here, then you would now see the end of the landscape there. So we're going to need to use some of the height maps to raise up the terrain in those areas. In fact, it may be an idea to use some of the height maps to bring up that level to begin with, to obscure the end of the landscape. So let's try stamp some of these mountains down and let's see what we get. Again, always go back to the player's view. Try and position the camera so that we can see the terrain off in the distance. And again, use many different height maps to create variations, and also think of the flow of each height map into the next as well, continually changing the rotation of the texture. Even if you get areas like this where you have the smoothed landscape underneath and then a higher detailed one on top, it doesn't matter really, because we can come along with some of the different brushes and we'll sort out these variations between high detail and smoothed areas. We can always add some more detail to it. And if you want to add multiple height maps together, then just place them over each other, stamp them down, just to see how it varies. Generally, you don't want to stamp down a height map at the very edge of the landscape, because otherwise you end up seeing this sharp corner when you're down on the ground, as it can raise the corner up to a point. Much better to actually use the stamp down the height map just before the corner, so that it obscures that corner of the landscape, and then it shows it looks more natural because it shows the edge of the stamped down height map, which is much more natural. Again, just vary this by using different height maps and different rotations till we get something that looks fairly good. This is all down to your personal choice as to what you think looks good. So now that we've got something that looks fairly good, and again we need to go back to thinking of the flow of the landscape as to what our game is about. Let's put one over here. And then what we can do is we can work on different parts, so that all this smoothed area here we could use some of the hills again. We can almost treat them like erosion brushes in a way. So one way, or multiple ways in which we could erode this sort of area. We can stamp down the hill brushes with a fairly low amount, and this is going to raise it up to create this sort of effect. Obviously, if you don't want to keep going up, then you could always press the shift key to stamp it down. And again, this will give you a certain amount of erosion. But if we go back to using the lakes, and with this one we can press the shift key, and this creates a different kind of erosion. And then what we can do is we can add multiple ones together, so we could use another one over here, a different rotation. Press the shift key, and this is what we get. We bring down the tool strength on that one. Press the shift key and stamp down. Like I say, we're not looking to do big changes. It's just more accumulation of small changes. So once we've got a particular kind of look, we could switch then to some of the other brushes, to the surface brushes, and with this we can actually change to a more painting style really. So if we change the brush size, try 20,000, again it's more trial and error just to see what works and what doesn't. And with this one, what we need to do is decrease the tool strength down. So what we're going to do now is keep the mouse down so that it actually accumulates these stamping down of the brushes in one area. So if we turn on auto rotate with this one, then what we can actually do is we can cause the brush to flow in a way. So if we stamp this down a little bit, and we can start and see how it's going to add up. And we can also press the shift key as well, so that we can cause it to be pushed down. If we don't like particular mound that we've created, then press the shift key and then stamp down with the left mouse button to erode it down. And what we're doing here is we're just looking at how the land flows and seeing what we need to create really. And we can switch to these different brushes as well to create more variations. And again, we could increase the size and the strength. If the tool is always changing in rotation, you can always turn off the auto rotate. Again, position it on the landscape and then look at the rotation of it. And then we can actually stamp that down like that. Just remember that it is always going to flow in the same direction, so if you're on the side of a mountain, then this would cause the lines to appear in the opposite direction. So maybe it wouldn't give you the best flow, but it would certainly give you a different artistic style. So if we position somewhere else, we can always rotate again. Hold the shift key to stamp down. I'm going to vary it with different brushes. And different sizes. If there are areas that you do need to fix, maybe it becomes too broken up, then what we can always do is we can switch over to the smooth brush, leave it on circle, and we can maybe decrease the brush size, and we can smooth those areas out to get rid of that detail. And then we can switch back to the Sculpt brush, the Sculpt Tool, and then the Alpha brush. Switch to one of the other brushes. Set the brush size again. Maybe even smaller for this one. Set the rotation. And then add detail back in again. Press the shift key to change it again. All based on what kind of look you want to go for. Other things that we can use as well is if this was some sort of moon landscape, then we may want to use some of the different brushes with craters, cracks, things like that. So if we change to a crater, then we may want to stamp one of these down. So to stamp one of these down, we could do it in two ways. One is we can use the Sculpt Tool with a fairly high amount for the tool strength. And again, with this tool, we want to hold Shift down. Change that to a higher tool strength. Press Shift and stamp it down. Then it's going to cut into the landscape. Alternatively, we can switch to the Flatten Tool with the Alpha brush, and what we can do is we can set the tool strength to 1, set the flatten target this time, and the way we use this tool is if we were wanting this level here to come down to say this level here, then we could use this eyedropper tool to then select that level, which will then load up into this value the level at which that height is at. And then we go back over to where we want to stamp down, and we tell it to lower. Make sure the brush size is correct, and rather than holding shift this time, we just stamp with the left mouse button, and it causes the entire height map to go down to the level that we sampled at. We'll undo that one because I think it just went a little bit low on that, so we can always manually tweak this value and then stamp down again. But again, it's what kind of landscape you're creating. You can always use some of the other brushes. And then we can always add multiple ones together as well. Again, it's what kind of style you're going for. Which, if this isn't a moonscape, then you want to stick to the mountains, hills and lakes, things like that. So, let's see what we've got. Other things we can always stamp down as well is the volcanoes. You know, so if it was something that was quite mountainous with a big volcano, then we could maybe see where we would want to stamp that down. Change the tool strength to be fairly high, brush size to be big as well. Stamp that down and let's have a look at it. And we can see how that sits with the overall landscape that we have. Again, look at it from the player's point of view. He's down on the ground, and remember this is a meter by meter, so fly through the landscape with the WASD keys and your right mouse button. And then once we actually want to place some water in here, then multiple things we can do really. One is that we can stamp in the lakes. So if we go and get one of the lakes, change the tool strength to be a bit higher, hold the shift key down and then stamp that down. Then what we end up with is a trough that we can place water into. So if we have a look at this water plane here, we'll turn on the planar reflection first and then the water plane. Get hold of the water plane, we'll drag that down. And now we can see how that sits in with the landscape. Other things we may want to do as well is actually smooth out areas, or use the Flatten Tool to flatten the overall area around here. So if we wanted something that maybe went up fairly high, but we wanted flat areas around here, then what we could do is let's go back to the landscape and the sculpting tools, change to the Flatten Tool, change it to a circle, again use the eyedropper to pick the location of where we would want the height to be, change this to raise, tool strength to be 1, decrease the brush size down, and then now we can draw in that, so it actually fills it in. And then what we can do is we can then use either smoothing brushes to smooth out some of these areas, the variations. So we could switch to the smooth tool, sorry, bring that tool strength down, bring the size down, and then go around the edges. So we can always add some of that detail back in again. If we don't want to do that, just undo that. And then we could place the lake back in again. So if we... Now what we can do here is we can actually stamp in with the Flatten Tool again. We could sample that level again, and we can cause it to jump down by a specific amount. So if we've already sampled this area, so if we wanted to go down, say, 3 meters, we could change this 1442 to 1742, which would then take 3 meters off of it, 300 centimeters off of it. And then now we can change this to lower, tool strength to 1. Now pick the alpha brush with whichever lake we want. Just increase the brush size. And just stamp it in, let's see how it looks. So I think we want to go down a little bit more than that, so let's take another 300 off there, so we'll go down to minus 2000. We'll increase this size to be bigger. And maybe change the texture to a different one. Let's rotate that around. Till we get something that looks like we want it to look. Can go a little bit bigger on that one. There's just multiple ways of creating whatever style you want. I think we'll take that down a little bit more. And we'll make it a little bit bigger. And let's not forget to also decrease the planar reflection down as well, because that needs to be at the water level. So if we get the water Z value, which is minus 1670, go to the planar reflection, again minus 1670, and then make sure it fully covers the lake, which we can change to wireframe mode. Actually rotate that round. And there we have it. We can create many different kinds of landscapes with these texture tools. While in this view, if we also move the view with the right mouse button held down, then we can press F11 to go into the immersive view, and then we can also press G to change to the game mode. And now we can actually see what it would look like if we were a player on the shore. and we get to see what kind of landscape we're creating. Thank you for joining me today for this first tutorial for this Land Heightmaps Pack Vol1. Hopefully you'll create something special with your landscape. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.